Welcome to today's webinar with Real Story Group. My name is Scott Dill, and as you can see, our founder, Tony Byrne, is with us as well. Today, Tony's going to walk us through a very provocative topic. We're going to look at MarTech leader career killers, and we just finished Halloween, so a little bit of a Halloween theme to today's slide deck. So I hope you enjoy that, and we certainly thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us. As always, we will have time for questions at the end of today's session. So if you do have questions, please enter those into the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. And then for all the attendees today, you will be able to access a copy of these slides. Those should be available within the next couple of days. So keep an eye out for those from our marketing team. And then for our subscribers on the line, thank you for being a customer. Certainly do appreciate your business. You will be able to access this in your subscriber library, again, within another couple of days. So keep an eye out for this recording or when it becomes available. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tony, who's going to walk you through today's presentation. Tony?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. You know, it is a provocative title, and I see a lot of old friends and new friends on the call. Certainly a lot of you have taught me what I know here, and just hoping to sort of share a little bit in a sort of this will be a little bit of a Halloween theme. And a number of things that I raise may not necessarily kill you, but they could haunt you, scare you, slow you down, throw you off. But in some cases, it can be really significant problems. And so one of the things that, you know, we're really focused on is supporting not just the companies that subscribe to our research, but the MarTech leaders who have really engaged with us over the years. And, you know, we've seen some people really get stymied and other cases, you know, individuals really thriving. And so it's kind of two sides of the coin here, but in the spirit of Halloween, we're going to keep this a little bit haunted. So some of you I know are new to Real Story Group. Just a little background, we've been kind of myth killers for the last 20 years or so. We founded the firm really in reaction to this static quadrant that you see on the left, this idea that there are generic winners and losers. We decided that there should be a new and different way to evaluate marketing vendors. And to do that, we decided very early on that we were not going to work with vendors, advise vendors, just work with you on your side of the table, helping you make really good decisions as technology buyers, and whose decisions obviously are really significant for your company, but also your career. So if you've been following us, you know we cover a lot of different vendors, more than 160 that we evaluate in our research. And to just organize all of them together on a single infographic, we decided to use this kind of subway map motif that shows the different vendors with the and the different marketing technologies and related technologies that they supply. There's no best or worst place on this map, but there are obviously a lot of vendors and a lot of choices. And in helping organizations like yours think this through over time, we've really helped a number of MarTech leaders deal with not just specific vendor selection choices, but overall kind of stack strategies. And so I'll be speaking to a lot of that today. But there's 5 potential, I'll call them career deadeners that you might run into here. And I'll invite you, if you have experienced any of these, to share your thoughts anonymously in the questions tab, and I'll share those then anonymously with the team. Or if you've got a 6th or a 7th that you want to share from your experience, there's going to be time for you to do that. So feel free to use the questions tab and go to webinar. Or if you simply disagree with something and want to put in a little bit of a counterpoint, that's always welcome as well. So the first thing to be careful about is to align with an undead vendor. And I can tell you there are a lot of these out there right now, partly because in the software as a service world, old vendors don't die, they just kind of fade away. There's ways of ratcheting down their marginal costs as their marginal revenues come in. And so the good news is it's not like the bad old days where a vendor would go bankrupt and necessarily leave you in the lurch, but there's definitely a lot of undead platforms out there. And it turns out that there's vendors who specialize in accumulating undead platforms. And you need to know about this and really understand the position that this puts you and your colleagues in. So I'm going to spill some tea here and list a few of them. CA is famous for this, so is OpenText. They both have a financial strategy of buying technologies, particularly typically on-premise technologies that have plateaued in the marketplace, and then they provide a kind of continuing care for them from potentially active retirement, independent living, to assisted living, to hospice, and then off into the sunset. And it turns out that this can be very lucrative and profitable business. And so, those firms specialize in that. And so if you're licensing some of their technologies, you need to sort of be aware of that look, there's not going to be any major leaps in innovation here. They're going to fix enough bugs to keep you happy enough to make you not want to switch. To some extent, acoustic and HCL, though not quite in this category. We're talking about the old IBM portfolio that has gone on to these firms. They have both gotten funding and talk a good game about reviving and, this kind of fountain of youth for these technologies. I think you should be skeptical there, and again, understand that these are more likely platforms that you leave rather than you license afresh. And I really point this out because we have seen some catastrophic mistakes where sometimes an enterprise unknowingly will go and license something from one of these vendors and think that it's, brand new, spanking new, or that there's really some product management oomph behind it. And I'm dumbfounded. I mean, we worked with a major technology company that just licensed OpenText TeamSite out of the blue. It was the first time I had heard of anybody ever licensing it afresh. And they just didn't know that this was a platform essentially in independent living, probably headed soon for assisted living. So, you really want to be careful because that can be a catastrophic mistake. At the bottom are some other kind of financial constructs. These are the three biggest ones, Byrne, Aurea, and Upland. And what they do is buy once hot technologies that were venture funded, never hit liftoff, and then what do you do with them? And they typically buy the bones of them and then put them into some so-called suite. But they're just sort of riding off into the sunset with these technologies. Again, they typically tend to be good stewards of the technology in terms of actually keeping it afloat. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. And that's why I wouldn't necessarily say, hey, if I've got a platform with one of these vendors, that therefore I should automatically leave. You should just understand that you will be leaving them at some point. It's just a question of whether you're going to be in charge of it, or at some point they're going to have so few customers that they're just going to sunset. So here's the advice. It's okay to sustain a relationship with an undead vendor. You just need to meter your innovation expectations, and I would say, have no expectations of innovation. And then to distinguish between undead and zombie. So zombie is really, I talked about hospice, this idea that there are some that are really almost truly dead, and you need to be really clear about that maybe that is a time to exit. So undead is okay, I can keep rolling along with them. Zombie, you want to start thinking about leaving, and you should never ever license something new from one of these vendors. But if you already have one of these tools, it's really critical for you in your career and really your authority to communicate expectations to your colleagues, that look, this is who we have. We have this vendor that's, in independent living or assisted living, whatever it is. They're not dead, but they're not going to be fully alive here for very much longer. And to communicate those expectations that you need to have a strategy and a plan about exiting, even though it's not necessarily an emergency situation. So that's the first thing to avoid. The second one is a really problematic one, and I know you're all struggling with this issue, but I'm going to say it anyway. The second career killer, and in some ways, I almost think for you as individuals, this may be at some level the most dangerous for you, which is underinvesting in internal talent. And I think particularly when we think about MarTech as opposed to ad tech and advertising, and other things where there's a constant premium on the new and on creativity. And here, it's not that we're not interested in creativity, but we are interested in performance, continuity, a lot of learning, constant testing. And we've just seen that those organizations that have invested in retaining and sustaining and maintaining internal talent to be able to execute on the platforms that they've licensed, move faster and move farther. While there's a lot of innovation and talent and possibilities out there in the marketplace, working with agencies and integrators, consultants and others. Heck, we're an outside advisor, right? So we're one of them. But what you don't want to be in a situation where you're actually dependent on an external provider. And we see this a lot with integrators and to some extent agencies who go from being kind of advisors to implementers, and then they become like service bureaus, right? Where they're actually doing the work for you. And at that point, you're losing all of the learnings, all of the expertise. And what's more, it can leave you kind of boxed in where all of your requests have to go through, a request process and change management and maybe an estimation. And, what you really want to do is iterate and be agile. We did a survey, this is a couple years back, and, that one of the big takeaways from the survey is in the red boxes down here, that the tools that many organizations had were problematic. But I want to focus on the middle orange line here, which was really some of the communications, not just in the data, but in some of the qualitative information that came back, and some of the survey responses was really a fear of being over-reliant on external skills and a lack of in-house capacity to execute on some of the strategies that were being put in place. I think that's even more true today. The pandemic obviously, and the Great Resignation and everything else is simply only accentuating this. So, if MarTech needs to be agile, and hopefully we all agree that it does, that really requires resources close at hand. It's very difficult to be agile with external partners. And in fact, many external integrators can't work and can't price in an agile way. It's too risky for them. They sometimes work off narrow margins, and they tend to do a lot of micro waterfalls. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And we'll see in a moment, I'm not saying that you should totally, avoid using these firms. I'm just saying you shouldn't be in a situation where for your day-to-day execution, you're dependent on them. And now you may say, hey, we're short-staffed, we can't get people who can return. You need to understand that external consultancies, agencies, integrators, they are as short-staffed as you are. They will often win a deal and then go staff it up. And so, everyone is facing this problem, and you can't just assume that they've got this deep bench that is immediately going to be available to you. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't outsource. I'm just suggesting that you should be strategic about outsourcing in terms of very specific skills or very specific depth at a particular point in time, like you're trying to upgrade a system or you're trying to bring a new company into your environment or something like that, where some external support is going to accelerate you, right? You should always think of, is this external contractor going to accelerate some process, or is it or I'm going to lose something in the long run, particularly, lose some expertise. We're going to be having more conversations around this with our executive council, where some of in our future sessions in the new year, we're going to be talking about just how to deal with this, the skills and experience deficit. But it really starts with having a strategy of bringing more in-house. The second one we see a lot, and I think that I'm going to guess that a lot of the people who have self-selected into this call probably don't exhibit this problem, but there could be team members of you who do. And so this is this idea that I'm on the marketing side, and tech is like, whatever happens over there, yeah, they do this magic with the data, and then, I don't know, somehow the emails go out, and then the tech people say, oh, the marketers, whatever, they come up with their ideas, and our job is to slow them down and make sure they don't make a mistake, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that there is still, even in this era of MarTech, and even in high-performing marketing technology organizations, marketing operations, and dotted line IT organizations into marketing, still a lot of misunderstanding. And I think some of it stems from a lack of curiosity, and you have to squeeze that curiosity out of yourself and out of your organization, because to really be effective, we've seen the marketing people have to be tech savvy and the tech people have to be marketing savvy, and this has to be a pervasive strategy throughout, or you can really get slowed down. So it really leaves both sides, out of the loop. And at worst, it's this sort of I don't care type attitude. So, I don't know whether Justin Bieber is marketing or IT here, but it's this idea that, that's somebody else's problem. And ideally, what you want is for marketing and IT both to understand that any problem on either side is both their problem and they can both solve it. That's the only way you can move at the kind of speed that you want to move. So what this means is that marketers need to learn how different technologies work, as well as key concepts. Release management is just one of them, but also data quality, data integrity, all kinds of other really important issues that can be difficult to learn. And if you have people who don't want to make that leap, I think you need to counsel them about whether they're really a good fit in your organization. But by the same token, those of you who are on the technology side, you need to fully grasp that marketers have needs for things that are going to push your buttons as an IT person. I mean, they constantly need speed and are willing to take some risks. They constantly have to be testing and adapting. Measurement needs to be built in from day one. If you build an application that is not self-measuring or is not generating metrics, you are doing them a disservice. And of course, now this whole emphasis on real time. So processes that you built and loved and coveted and hardened based on batch, for many organizations is not working. So this is obviously stressful, but I think really understanding marketers and the world they live in can help you then have better conversations around how you can get them where they need to go. This also means that marketing and IT need to jointly select technology. So I want to thank my colleague Apur for reminding me of this one, that we still sometimes do see one side or the other abdicate and say, let marketing pick the tools. We can't, be responsible. And obviously you don't want that because then you have to support it. And then other times marketing saying IT should just pick the tools. They know what we need. These selection processes really need to be a joint effort. But I think maybe the most important advice I would give for you, because I think you probably already grasp all of this, is to really stamp out black boxes among your reports and hire people with genuine curiosity about how the other half has to live and work. And it really does come down to a kind of openness and curiosity, because without that across your whole team, it's going to be very difficult for you to work in an adaptive way. And I think we're all learning that this is really being a contemporary digital marketer really means being, adaptive. So I wanted to remind you again that you can ask any questions or deliver your own comments through the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll definitely have time to get to those. So those of you who have been on our webinars before will recognize this one, and it's a really big one, and it's getting bad out there. And it's a particularly difficult one because, there are large vendors who would seem to want to empower you and solve a lot of your biggest, thorniest problems. And so it feels like they're on your side, and in fact that you can kind of use their heft and resources to sort of advance your own career. And certainly that's the way that they talk to you. But you need to be careful, because if you let them set your architecture and your strategy, you actually become very disempowered and in fact at some risk within your organization. So, on the one hand, there's this great power behind some of the leading MarTech suite vendors, but that power can and often will turn against you when you are doing things that are not in their financial interest. And so that nice, pleasant monster who you were using to defend your castle suddenly, turns and can turn on you. And so, there are vendors from the get-go that want to own your stack. And they've been very clear about this in terms of the way that they talk to Wall Street. And the way that they talk to Wall Street, you have to remember, is, of course, the best truth of what's really happening out there. And so Adobe and Salesforce, yes, they will sell you a single platform, but they do not want to sell you a single platform. They want to sell you a whole panoply of tools that are vaguely interrelated and will lock you in to them going forward. And then the solution to many of your problems is simply more technology, and it just becomes a resource extraction exercise. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have good technologies and you shouldn't license some of their tools. What I'm saying is that you should be very directed about it and license a particular tool as a as a technology choice and not as a vendor strategy. Acoustic and Acquia, to a lesser extent, I think they have ambitions to do this. Oracle and Microsoft also have some ambitions to do this. Their platforms aren't quite wide enough, but they definitely want to bring you kind of into their world and have you see the world through their lens and have you see your problems through their lens as well. And so what are the risks here for you? I think that they're substantial. But first, I'll just give you an example. Here's Adobe, where this is their view of the world, where you have this massive data platform underneath that replicates a lot of capabilities you probably already have in your data ecosystem, a set of application services, and then everything across the top, the whole panoply of marketing technologies. Many of these sort of cobbled together actually surprisingly don't integrate particularly well, with some exceptions. But they want to present this as a coherent whole, even though the reality is it is not. And then you can even go beyond that, and they'll bring in advertising and commerce, and basically, and this is of course the story that they're, as you know, that they're telling to your executives as well. And so, forewarned is forearmed. You need to be able to build a story around this, and I'll talk later about what that story looks like to really defend against it. So, what you have to worry about here is getting disempowered, and this can start right away in the sales process. You need to understand that these vendors can and will go above your head, even to the board level, and so you need to be prepared for that. At the same time, understand, and this is part of being prepared, is that their own suites are very mixed and matched, and they're not as well integrated as advertised. And some pieces may work for you, but others surely will not. And it would be a massive coincidence if all of Adobe or Salesforce or Microsoft's products turn out to be the right fit for you. The other thing that we've seen, and this can get ugly, is that sometimes these vendors, very often these vendors will blame you when things go wrong, or tell your leadership you haven't, simply implemented it the right way, or you haven't modernized your thinking. And so, you don't want to overweight these relationships. Their goal is to create a deep relationship across your organization, land and expand. And you should not assume that they have your best interests at heart, and really leverage what's the best fit for you out of them, and really work to make sure that you keep the upper hand in this relationship. So there's a related issue here, because we happen to think that a lot of these large suite vendors are actually still living in the 2010s. And we also think that other major analyst firms are living in the 2010s. And if you're still living in the 2010s, then I think you're going to be fighting yesterday's battles. And my wish for you is not to do that. So don't fight yesterday's monsters. To be sure, this is easier said than done, because these monsters are at the door. They're causing problems. The big one is around integration in your stack, and how do you deal with the conundrum of integration. And we have just a different concept about how to do that. Let's talk about what the 2010s was about. It was really about multi-channel modernization. So a number of you were modernizing your web content management systems, implementing DAM, modernizing e-commerce, getting good at email and marketing automation, hopefully, and modernizing your social engagement, trying to connect to some enterprise data sources, usually not very successfully, but figuring out that, you have all of these different channels that, increasingly you get more skilled at delivering content, and then ultimately services and interactions through. So this was the challenge of the 2010s, and many of you were up for this challenge and did go through some successful modernization. The problem is that as you got more robust in these colored areas down here, you also became more siloed. And so now that we're, deep into a decade of trying to do this, you have all this spaghetti integration and it's not working. All this lateral integration. Can I integrate my web content management system with my e-commerce? Can I integrate my e-commerce with my email system? Can I integrate my email system with my loyalty system? Can I integrate my social with my CRM? And all of these point-to-point integrations are simply not sustainable. You're having to, change the tires on a car that's moving, and it's just not working. And each year brings more and more complexity to your stack. You can't make the issue of complexity go away, but I think that there are ways that you can rethink the architecture, so you're not, trying to spend all of your time dealing, for example, with Salesforce integration. Like integrating with Salesforce is almost everybody's biggest problem, and that's because Salesforce was not built as an integration platform. So you really need a new approach structurally to the way you think about your stack. Unfortunately, major analyst firms are not really there. They're still with both their biggest clients and their biggest allies, who are the major vendors, that are arguing that there are such things as digital experience platforms and that you can buy all these capabilities from a single vendor and this will make all that complexity go away. In fact, as we just saw, it can create certainly more problems than it might resolve. So our answer to this is to say, yes, you have more engagement channels than ever. Yes, you've got a variety of different interaction and delivery environments. So I'm moving down the stack here from top to bottom. Yes, you still have content and engagement services that really matter a lot for you. So here's an example one that's maybe more B2B focused, but it's got e-commerce, outbound marketing, loyalty, support and service. So this is maybe more B2C focused. On a B2B side, it might be more CRM instead of loyalty, but you get the idea. You still have these engagement services. The thing is that you have an opportunity to become lighter at that layer and instead focus your energies on enterprise foundation services that can interact with all of these different platforms. So we're suggesting essentially building up your core. Sometimes we call this Pilates, that if you build up your upper body strength without building up your core strength, you're going to lead to all kinds of problems and injuries. So really what you want to do is for the 2020s to really spend more time working on your core. Certainly your core customer data is essential, but also what reusable content do you need to abstract away and make available in a multi-channel way, in a way that web content management systems can't do. And likewise with decisioning, including testing and optimization and personalization, journey orchestration. These are things you don't want to bind to an individual stack. So, to an individual kind of engagement platform. You want to separate these elements out so that then you can make them available across these different services and channels. This is, to be sure, easier said than done. You need to take this step by step. We recommend starting with data because data is essential to unified, accessible customer data is essential to any kind of strategies that you want to have going forward. But if you really have an omni-channel perspective and really a more, I would say, customer-centric perspective, and the pandemic has taught us that you have to have that customer-centric perspective, then inevitably this is the stack you need to get to. Now, we know that a lot of you are already moving in this direction. You just haven't had a name for it. We call it enterprise foundation services or building your core. You may have other ways of describing it. The nomenclature is less important than actually taking steps to get there. You will get some resistance from sometimes from systems integrators who are used to beefing up your content and engagement services, certainly from vendors like Adobe and Salesforce and Oracle, who have made substantial investments in those content and engagement services, are not so good at the enterprise foundation services, or they want to bind those services to their foundation services to their engagement services in a very opinionated way. So, you're going to have to push back here a little bit. But the point is really don't follow a 2010s integration paradigm. It's a whole new world where you need to have more of these kind of core hubs that then provide services to your engagement folks. And so a lot of this is really around Pilates, building up your core, and focusing on composability rather than coupling. And so composability means that I don't want to bind my customer data to my email platform. I don't want to bind all of my personalization efforts to my web content management system. I need to be able to compose these services to bring them to bear when new things come to the market. So for example, the Facebook metaverse or the metaverse. I happen to think that it's likely not to endure, but it will come out with a lot of hype. And for a year, a lot of people will be talking about it before it self-implodes. And so your executives are likely to come to you and say, well, how can we participate in the metaverse? And I've heard everyone's going there. And you're going to need to have an answer. And to do that, rather than just using a bunch of Facebook tooling and having a completely separate experience there, you want to make sure that you are aligned around your core content, your core data that you can leverage in this new channel. So the key thing above all, and this is really my final career advice to you, is to own your stack. Right? Work with your enterprise architects, your business leadership, your technology leadership, and say, this is our stack, this is what we have, these are the gaps, this is where we're going. and we're going to make the big decisions here. Then having made those decisions, then you can plug in the right vendors, the right integrators, the right advisors to get you where you want to go. When someone else owns your stack, then you're kind of just along for the ride, and you don't want to be along for the ride. So we really welcome helping you on this journey. There's 3 ways that you can engage with us. The first is you can license any research stream, which would be a line on the subway map, and that gets you access to our decision tools like Real Quadrant that help you figure out what are the right vendors for you, what's a good shortlist, what are the true pros and cons about these different vendors. Second way we can help you is by advising you across your entire stack. So I know we're working with several of you on this call to help you think through your stack strategies on an ongoing basis. And then the third way we can help you if you're an end user enterprise is you can consider joining our council. This is an exclusive, private, peer-reviewed, peer-enabled council of MarTech leaders like yourselves who get together every 6 weeks or so, every 6 to 8 weeks, to share lessons learned, do case studies, and try to solve problems for each other. So it's a really great group. So with that, we'll see. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the questions tab. And then Scott, do you want to just talk real briefly about next steps?
Absolutely. If you'd like to learn more about the Stack Leadership Council that Tony mentioned, feel free to email explore@realstorygroup.com. Our next meeting is on December 9th about marketing attribution. So, if that's something that you'd like to explore in more detail, please let us know. Also, I did want to mention that if you're interested in the CDP line on the subway map, we'll be hosting a webinar in 2 weeks on how to successfully navigate a changing CDP landscape. So, feel free to join us for that. I'd be happy to have you then as well. And as always, you're welcome to download excerpts from any or all of our research areas that you see listed there. It does look like a few questions came in. So Tony, I'll hand it back to you for those.
Yeah. So John is asking, with the new integration model, how are you connecting the enterprise foundation services to the other layers, and how are integrations being simplified? That's a great question. And I don't have a single integration model. I think that the point is that instead of many-to-many integrations, you have one-to-many. So if I have to have all these different platforms that have to go to multiple different services to get a single customer record, that's a problem. I have a many-to-many integration issue. Whereas if I've gotten all of my customer data aligned in a CDP or something like a CDP, then I have a single place where I can go and get all of that, and I can invest in multiple forms of integration, including things that are messaging-based through Kafka, Batch, REST API, using a third-party platform like Zapier or Segment to handle the data transfer and maybe some ETL. And so I've got a single place where I can not just get the authoritative data, but the enterprise has invested in integration. And also, the assumption is that platform was built as an integration environment. I can tell you that the typical WCM, the typical map, the typical CRM, these are not built as integration environments. So it simplifies it to that extent. It doesn't, John, make the problem go away for sure. So James is asking, one of my favorite analogies from Real Story Group is don't buy the SUV for the roof rack. Can you explain that pitfall to the audience, please? Sure. So the idea is that sometimes we see enterprises essentially buying a module from a vendor just because it was thrown in, like the roof rack, and it turns out that it wasn't really what they needed. It was just sort of an add-on, like, oh yeah, we've got one of those, sure, just go ahead and it kind of gets tossed in, like IBM would sometimes toss in Web Content Manager with their portal, and then suddenly I'm using this Web Content Management system that may or may not work out for me. So, don't buy the SUV for the roof rack, but likewise, don't necessarily get the roof rack that comes OEM'd with the SUV, because it might not be the right roof rack depending on what you're trying to carry. And so, a good example is Adobe CDP, which is built on top of the Adobe AEP or the Adobe Experience Platform. You can't license CDP without the whole experience platform. So it almost is the roof rack. And so, you don't want to buy an SUV just because you like the roof rack, right? You want to buy the SUV because you like the SUV. So, we see a lot of that in the MarTech space. I won't say it's a career killer, but definitely, when it comes down to this idea of really setting your team up to be successful with the best fitting tools, you need to be a little bit more thoughtful about the way you handle the kind of bundling that vendors will do. Okay, with that, we've gone over. Thank you for sticking with us. Hope that you found this useful. Feel free to follow up with us if you have any further questions. But in the meantime, it was great to spend this half hour with you. So on behalf of my colleague Scott, this is Tony Byrne with Real Story Group saying so long until next time. I know.